Okay, so good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're based. I hope everybody can hear me okay, and that you should be able to see my screen. This is a webinar keeping control of your Azure spending. I always find that when I talk to Azure customers, there are three things that everybody cares about. Everybody cares about security, everybody cares about resilience and high availability, and everybody cares about costs. So hopefully this is going to be relevant for lots of people, and we can see how we go. Do feel free to drop questions into the chat. We do have a lot of material to get through, but I'll do my best to answer questions as time permits. So without further ado, let's jump in and get going. Okay, so this is me. My name is Jonathan Tuliani. I'm the European Managing Director for Opsgility. Opsgility, we're training providers. We are the training providers behind Opsgility.com and skillmeup.com, where we provide instructor-led and online training. I've been doing this role, 2-3 years, and before that I was roughly 10 years in Microsoft, and most of that time was actually spent in the Azure product group. So I have a detailed understanding of Azure built from the inside, from before Azure even had a virtual machine, would you believe? And I've spent roughly 20 years in IT altogether in a whole bunch of different roles across the development, pre-sales, product management, you name it, lots of different roles. Okay, so a little bit of background on Opsgility and who we are. So Opsgility, we're the first company in the world founded, dedicated towards Azure training, and we're now expanded to cover the whole of the Microsoft cloud, including Microsoft 365, Office 365, and so on. So we provide instructor-led training, which can be the virtual, of course, with the current coronavirus situation. We provide a lot of virtual training, and we also do on-site deliveries in normal times. And those can be built around either the Microsoft official curriculum for certification classes, and also we build an extensive range of our own classes that for custom deliveries, for advanced classes, hackathons, and so on. And we pride ourselves on the quality of our instructors. We really do make sure that we employ real world-class experienced experts for all of our training classes. We also provide online training through skillmeup.com, where we have not just, we have a comprehensive range of videos, but in addition to the videos, we also provide hundreds of hands-on labs, which come with a full lab environment, so you don't need to worry about subscription management or subscription costs. And they're not simulations, they're real Azure environments that you get given, or Microsoft environments that you get given there. We also provide live instructor training as part of the SkillMeUp experience with SkillMeUp Live. So there are live instructor expert talks and classes that are run on a regular schedule, including certification classes. And they're all built using unique content that our in-house experts has developed. Each subscription gives you unlimited access, and we have plans for individuals, teams, and enterprises. So there's some details at the bottom of the slide there, and we'll put this slide up again at the end for those who would like to get more time to note those details down. Okay, so for today, we're going to be talking about Azure cost management, Azure cost optimization. And to do that, we're going to start with a brief overview of how billing works in Azure. We're then going to look at the Azure pricing model, focusing on infrastructure, but at the same time as while we're thinking about infrastructure, a lot of what we're going to say, the general principles are very applicable for platform as a service offerings as well. Once you get the idea behind how cost and billing works in Azure, it's broadly applicable. Having looked at the pricing model, we're then going to look at many of the cost optimization techniques that are available for you. There's a manner of different things you can do to help control your costs. And then we're going to look at the Azure Cost Management Service, which is great for reporting your costs and just keeping track of where you are. So without further ado, let's dive in. The first section then is an overview of how billing works in Azure. Okay. So Azure Billing, Azure is available in 140 countries and billing in 24 different currencies. You can pay with a credit card if you sign up online. You can also pay for businesses. You can pay with by an invoice pay. So if you are a business and want to switch to invoice payment, you can raise a support ticket to do that, but it's a one-way trip. Once you switch to invoice payment, you can't switch back to credit card payment. But the point is there's a range of options available to suit all different scenarios, individuals, businesses, large enterprises. There are options available for everybody. When you sign up to Azure, what you get is a billing account, and each billing account then contains one or more subscriptions that you use to actually manage your Azure resources. And it's at the billing account level that you can then manage your invoices and make payments, track your costs, and so on. And there's lots of different billing account types. Some common examples are the online services. That's for people who sign up off the Azure website, just with their credit card. There's a new thing called the Microsoft Customer Agreement. And then there's enterprise agreements for large enterprises and the partner agreement for signing up through partners. So there's many different types of these billing accounts, but they all fundamentally give you access to the same set of Azure services through your Azure subscriptions. We'll have a look at a couple of examples of these billing accounts. So the online services program, this is where you've signed up from the Azure website. And in this case, you just have a simple arrangement where there's a billing account with one or more subscriptions. So as a billing account, when you sign up for the billing account, you become the account administrator. For each subscription you create, that same person by default will be the subscription administrator, although they of course can assign different administrators if they would like to. So you can have multiple subscriptions for the billing account, and each subscription comes with a separate invoice. That's the arrangement there. So pretty straightforward. The new arrangement is this thing called the Microsoft Customer Agreement. And it's worth reading up on this actually, because anyone who's using Azure is going to be faced with this Microsoft Customer Agreement at some point. Microsoft have recognized that they have lots of different agreements and sign-up processes for different parts of their offerings. You've got the accounts we just showed you. You've got different legal arrangements when you buy through a partner versus when you buy directly from the Microsoft field team versus when you buy online. Not all services that Microsoft offers in terms of, licensed software, online services, not everything is available under the same agreements. So it all becomes, rather complicated. And to streamline all of that, Microsoft has created this thing called the Microsoft Customer Agreement. And the idea is that this is a single agreement that covers all Microsoft products and services, and it covers all channels, whether that's self-service off the website, whether that's through partners, or whether that's through Microsoft's own field team. It doesn't matter what you're buying or how you're buying it, it can fall under the Microsoft Customer Agreement. It simplifies things greatly. Of course, at the moment, we're in a phase where it has to exist in parallel with the old arrangements, but things are transitioning in this direction, so it's worth being aware of. With a customer agreement, things are organized as the diagram shows on the right of the slide, where you have a billing account, which is then organized into profiles, which contain invoice sections, and then subscriptions and other purchases under each invoice section. So you organize your Azure subscription into this hierarchy, and you're invoiced at the billing profile level. So within a large enterprise, you can still have different invoices for different business units, for example. So this is the way that things work within a customer agreement. And within this, you acquire something called an Azure Plan or Azure Plan, and this determines your particular pricing and service level agreement and so on. For example, you might have a different Azure Plan for a Devtest subscription, which has certain discounts and a slightly different SLA. We'll actually talk about Devtest later. So this is how this works. So everyone should think about learning about this for the future. And the other thing that many people use, of course, is for large companies, they use enterprise agreements. These have been around for a long time. Again, it's a 4-level hierarchy you have with an enterprise agreement, but it's somewhat different in that the invoicing is at the top level rather than the second level. There is a mapping for how enterprise agreements are being evolved into the Microsoft Customer Agreement as they're renewed. And the mapping basically shifts some of these layers down one so that the invoicing maps up. But that's all documented online. So if you're in an enterprise agreement, it's a good idea to understand a little bit about how it works and how it can transition to the MCA in future. The other thing that's very relevant for many people is this idea of a CSP. This is the reseller program for Azure, and a huge proportion of Azure business actually goes through the CSP program. It's actually a massive proportion of Microsoft Azure business is sold through partners. So this is how partners can be involved in reselling services for Microsoft to their customers. And you can see on the diagram, there are two models effectively. One is called the direct CSP, and this is where the partner sits between Microsoft and the customer and takes on certain services on behalf of Microsoft as part of their delivery to the customer. So for example, they'll take on billing and they'll take on first line support. And in this model, of course, the partner gets a cut of the revenue that they are billing for the customer. They can mark up their Azure prices. They get a discount from Microsoft. They can mark up the prices because of the additional value, additional services that they're providing on top, and obviously take a margin there. And in addition to that, you have the indirect model, which is on the right of that diagram. This is where there's two partners involved. One is called the indirect provider, and the other is called the indirect reseller. So the provider would be a larger partner, and they're able to provide things like the billing systems and the technical support coverage. And then the reseller has the local knowledge and the local customer base, but they're perhaps not at the scale required to offer the technical support and the billing infrastructure. So by sharing that work with the indirect provider, it makes a business model that makes sense for both. So that's the indirect model that's also available. Okay, this is also moving towards the Microsoft Customer Agreement. In fact, new subscriptions coming through this will have to sign up to the Microsoft Customer Agreement. So everything aligns with the Microsoft Customer Agreement, in short. Great. Something I'm often asked is about spending limits in Azure. Is there a way to set a spending limit? Can I limit my spending? And the answer is, okay, for spending limits, there are spending limits on some subscriptions, and this basically applies to any subscription with free credits. So if you sign up for a free trial off the Azure website, you get a couple $100 of free credits. Or you might have a MSDN subscription, which can give you some free credits. And there's various other Microsoft promotions that give you free credits on your Azure subscription. And when you have one of those subscriptions, your spending will stop. You know, when your credits expire, your services will be suspended, and of course you won't be billed. You have the option to extend your usage. You know, put in your credit card number and say that, hey, sure, it's okay to bill me for these extra services. Please keep them running. Don't suspend my stuff. And you can choose to do that either on a month-by-month basis or indefinitely. So by lifting the spending limit, of course, you can carry on using those subscriptions, but there's no other way to automatically stop your spend within Azure. Not a way that's built in anyway. There's things you can do with your own automation, but built-in services, the free credits will suspend your usage. We will talk later about how you can set up alerts so that you're notified if your spend hits a certain threshold, you know, maybe $100 or $1,000 or whatever scale you're concerned about. You can set up spending alerts, but those only give you an alert. They don't do an automatic suspension for you. So the only automatic suspension is on the free credits. So just be aware of that. The other thing to be aware of is the Azure Marketplace. And this allows, as well as with your Azure subscription, as well as buying all these different Microsoft services, there's a huge range of third-party services available in the marketplace. And this is a very powerful opportunity for ISVs and managed service providers to make their services available, and a huge advantage, of course, for Azure customers to have that huge range of offerings available. The billing for this is a little bit different, though. It depends what type of billing account you have, how this works. So you can see here, if you're on the Microsoft Customer Agreement or the Partner Agreement, then these are billed, marketplace purchases from third parties are billed as part of your normal Azure invoice. But if you're on an EA or you've just signed up online on MOSP, then these are billed against a separate invoice against your subscription. It's a separate transaction from a legal point of view that's billed completely separately. Each of these services has its own billing model. Some of them are pay as you go, some of them you pay monthly, some you might even pay annually. So you'd have to check when you sign up what the billing model is. And you can see an example on the right of the slide. For a SendGrid email service, you can see the offer details there and how it's charged. It's on a monthly bill in this case. So be aware of those. With the third-party purchases, you can't use your free credits. The free credits only count against Microsoft services. So you can't use your free credits for these. And also, if you're on an enterprise agreement, it doesn't, a marketplace purchase is billed separately. It doesn't count against your enterprise commitment. So bear that in mind as well. And for CSP customers, the marketplace is now available for CSP. If you're on if the offering in the marketplace is a bring your own license model or is a free model, then that service is available on CSP. If it's something that's paid for through the marketplace, then these offerings can be made available through CSP, but it requires the ISV who's publishing this offer to the marketplace to opt in. It's not available by default. So that is the story with the marketplace. Okay. Okay, so we've understood a little bit about how billing works. The next section I want to talk about is just give you a brief tour of the Azure pricing model. We're just going to look at some key services just to call out A little bit about the flavor of how the model works. And once you understand this, once you've understood this for a few services, you kind of get a feel for how this works. And for each service in Azure, there is a pricing page that will describe it. So, I mean, there's over 100 services in Azure. Obviously, I'm not going to run through every single one of them. By looking at this handful, you'll get a flavor of how it works, and you can then scale that for yourself with any additional services you use. Okay, so let's have a look at it. With each service you consume, each service has what's called usage meters. So the meter is what is effectively makes its way into your bill. The service emits these meters into internal logs that Microsoft maintains, and then the billing system picks up those meters and takes that data and uses it to construct your overall Azure bill. So the services emit the meter, and the meter wends its way into your bill at the end of the day, or the end of the month rather. So there's different types of meters, but generally they fall into one of three patterns. So one is time-based. So you created a resource and you're billed for how long that resource exists. So for example, if you create a virtual machine, you're billed for how long that virtual machine is running, or how long that CPU and memory is allocated to that virtual machine. And if you have a public IP address, there are some cases where they're free, but if it's a paid for IP address, then again, you pay for that IP address for how long it is made available to you. In some cases, this might be per second billing, for example, for a VM. In some cases, more usually, it might be an hourly billing or even daily billing, typically prorated over the course of a month, although there are some exceptions where you might pay for the whole month. So that's the time-based usage. There is also some billing that is based on how much you use the service. So for example, if you have a storage account, you might pay for the transactions on that storage account. So the more you use the service, the more transactions you have, well, the more you're going to pay. Likewise, if you look at how bandwidth is charged, the more data that you take from Azure, that you serve from your VMs, for example, that's the more bandwidth you're consuming, and you're billed for bandwidth. So you're billed, per gigabyte for how much data you've used. So the more you use it, the more you pay. That's the usage-based model. And then finally, there are a small number, and I do stress small, a small number of services in Azure that are more transactional, that are kind of a one-off purchase or maybe an annual purchase that hits your bill as a single line item, rather than being a kind of pay-as-you-go model. You can see the time-based and usage-based, they really fulfill the promise of the cloud as being a pay-as-you-go, pay for what you use model, where when you stop using it, or you stop paying. But a small number of things do follow this transactional model. For example, if you buy an SSL certificate, it's a 12-month certificate, you're going to pay a one-time fee for that 12 months. Likewise, if you register a domain name, that's a 12-month name registration, and again, you're going to pay a one-time fee for that. So there's a handful of these examples that are transactional, but really very few. And as we said, each resource has its own meters, and it's important to understand how those meters work and understand for each resource how the billing is charged. Very often, the meters have quite a lot of different parameters to them. The pricing will vary according to which offer your subscription is on. It will vary according to the currency that you're billed in. It'll vary according to the region you deploy into. And also within the services, there can be different pricing SKUs. There may be a basic SKU and a standard SKU and a premium SKU that are charged at different rates. Maybe the basic SKU is free, maybe it's not. So there can be different tiers with different capabilities that are charged at different rates. And that for the service effectively becomes an upsell model. So that's the big picture there. Let's look at some examples. So Azure virtual machines, these are charged per second for the time the machine is running, or the machine is allocated. If you stop the machine from the Azure portal, then you stop paying. But if you just shut down the machine from within the machine, then it's still actually allocated to Azure hardware, and you're still paying in that case. The pricing will vary according to many of those parameters we just discussed. What pricing tier you're on, the size of the machine, the family that it comes from. A large G series machine costs you a lot more than a small A series machine. So you can see there's going to be a huge range according to the size of these machines. The operating system and software is also going to be charged separately. We'll talk about that on the next slide. It's worth bearing in mind that there may be a lot of additional services that come with your machine, in particular the disk, networking, that are charged separately. A virtual machine on its own doesn't really make sense. A virtual machine works together with other Azure resources, and that's where the art comes, if you like, in computing your bill or forecasting your bill, is to make sure that you've covered all the different resource types that you're going to use, and that you've got the right settings for each resource and the right estimates on your usage levels. So we'll talk more about that later when we look at the pricing calculator, but just bear in mind that the VM isn't the only cost here. There's a lot of things that come with it. So when we think about software licensing with virtual machines, when you pay for a virtual machine, you really pay for several different things. You pay what's called the base compute cost, which is just the raw cost for the hardware that's being used to run that machine. So that's the CPU and the memory. Disks are separate, don't forget. So the CPU and the memory you're paying for. That's your base compute cost. And then on top of the base compute cost, you also pay license costs for the software that runs on that machine. And there can be different categories there. So one might be an operating system license, for example, because you're running a Windows server and you're going to pay an operating system cost with that. There may be additional software that you're licensing on top of the operating system. Maybe it's got SQL pre-installed, or maybe it's a marketplace offering with some pay-as-you-go software installed. So that's where you have software costs on top. There are various plans in place to avoid you paying for licenses you already have. We'll talk about some of these later. In particular, also be aware of the license mobility, which allows eligible server applications that you've licensed from Microsoft already that you're running on premises. You can migrate many of these to Azure, and your license works. You know, your license allows you to do that and to run that software that you've paid for on an Azure VM instead. So that's called license mobility, and avoids you having to purchase new licenses in those scenarios. But check up the details on the link on the slide. As we said, you have your VMs. You're going to have to pay for your disks as well, and there's a bunch of different parameters here that you will choose between. So there's three kind of normal tiers: standard HDD, standard SSD, and premium SSD. And then there's also a fourth tier called Ultra Disk, which is a little bit more limited in its availability. In general, you pay more for the different tiers, and they have different performance in terms of the latency and the throughput on those disks. You'll also pay more, of course, for larger disks. And in the standard tiers, you'll also pay for transactions. You don't pay for transactions on the premium tiers. Different prices in different regions. You could say that about pretty much every Azure resource, so maybe I'll stop saying it. And then the UltraDisk has a different model. Here you're paying for the provision size and the provisioned Iops and the provisioned throughput. You scope what you need in terms of Iops and throughput, and you pay accordingly. And you can see some examples there. So on the table, I've locked it to a 1 terabyte disk, and I've locked the region as well. This is East US 2. And here you can see how the Iops ranges between 500 Iops for a standard disk at both HDD and SSD. SSD is obviously a solid state. HDDs are spinning disks. And then the premium SSD gives you a lot more Iops. But then UltraDisks gives you a range of Iops. As we say, you tell it what kind of Iops you need. So this huge range of Iops available on UltraDisks. And then throughput likewise increases according to the tier that you're on. And again, for UltraDisk is variable according to what you need. But likewise, then you see the costs vary enormously. You see going up from $40 up to the UltraDisk up to it could be just over $10,000. I mean, that's a huge cost, but of course that's for the maximum possible limit. That's a huge Iops and a huge throughput on that disk. And you can see also the cost for transactions there. So just be aware of those. You can also have disk snapshots and images, and those are charged based on the space used. So be aware of that. They can be an alternative as a backup option in some scenarios. And like I say, they're based on the size of the data, not on the disk size. So you're not paying for the empty space there. Whereas for the normal disks, you do pay for the empty space. You pay for the provision size. Okay. Networking. There's many services relating to Azure networking. So I'm only touching on it here. Networking is a huge topic in Azure. But in general, you start with your virtual network, which is your private IP space in Azure. And virtual networks are free. You don't pay for the virtual networks, but you do pay sometimes at least for pretty much everything else. So if you're going to use a load balancer, well, if you're on the basic SKU with a single IP, that's free. But once you come to the standard SKU, which you would need if you want to use availability zones, then you are paying for the load balancer. You can see some details on the slide there. You pay for additional IP addresses. You pay for standard tier IP addresses. So there's a range of resources you'll start paying for there once you start using the Azure networking. Bear that in mind as you consider which networking services you use. You also pay for bandwidth. We mentioned that earlier as well. Now, this used to be a simple model, but has now, over time, slowly become a little bit more complicated. So let me explain some of the ins and outs here. So the way it used to work, it was very straightforward. You would pay to put well, it would be free to put your data into Azure. It used to be free to move your data around within Azure, and you would pay to get your data out. So basically, the outbound data is what you would pay for, and that makes sense because the outbound data is really a very good measure of the value that your Azure-based services are delivering for your customers. So it's value-based pricing. The more value you're getting, the more you're paying effectively. So that's the old model, if you like. Now that model still applies. It applies at least mostly. However, there are a few kind of additions that have been made to that model over time. So the first is with availability zones. So these are within a region. It used to be that moving data within a region was free, but you would pay for data across regions. Obviously, that looks like outbound data. But now with availability zones, from the 1st of January this year, you actually pay for data between zones within a region, and that's 1 cent per gigabyte. And the peering connections as well. If you start peering virtual networks together, even within a region, again, this is a case where you'll start paying for data within a region. It's a higher rate when you go across region, but even within a region, you're paying 1 cent per gigabyte for your peering data. And actually, you're paying 2 cents because you paid on both ends, on the inbound and outbound, for both virtual networks that you've peered. So that's the model you have for bandwidth pricing. Okay. For ExpressRoute, so this is where you have an on-premises connection with a dedicated leased line to Azure, effectively through a connectivity partner. You have a couple of different models there. You have a metered and an unmetered model. So this is where on the metered model, you pay a fixed price for the connection. You also pay the third party, of course, and then you also pay if you want to connect this connection to a virtual network. Then you need to get a gateway, an ExpressRoute gateway, and you pay for that. And that price can vary according to the size of the gateway. An alternative model is where you have an unmetered connection. And this is where data in both directions is free, but you obviously pay a higher fixed charge. So here you have to balance, how much data are you going to use? Is it worth being on the metered connection where you're paying for your data outbound, or do you want to just pay a fixed cost and be on the unmetered connection? So it depends, and it's straightforward to just do the math and look at the pricing rates and figure out which one is going to be better for you based on your usage estimates. So that's straightforward, and in both cases you'll need that gateway. It's worth being careful about ExpressRoute pricing. It's potentially it's not. It doesn't have to be expensive. A basic ExpressRoute can be relatively inexpensive, but it can be expensive. So I've got a little example here. So if you create an ExpressRoute circuit, you go unmetered, and you'd use the larger circuit size, a 10 gig circuit, and you do this in the Brazil region, and you include something that's an add-on called ExpressRoute Premium. If you choose those settings, that will cost you $85,000 per month. So that's an expensive bill. But the cheapest range, if you can tweak those settings, bring it down to the smaller circuit in a cheaper region and so on, and you can cut this down to just $55. So it's just a huge range there. Now notice, I think ExpressRoute is the only place in the portal I've ever seen this, where you create an ExpressRoute circuit. There's just a screenshot in the bottom right of the slide there, that there's a little warning. By clicking the create button, you understand that billing will start immediately upon creation of the ExpressRoute, and you agree to accept the charges. So you're going to start paying that $85,000 the moment someone creates the resource, is what it's saying. You don't have to wait to set up the third-party connection before you start paying. This is just going to start billing immediately. So this is where you need to be a little careful about your billing, because what's to stop you doing that today, right now? It'll take you 1 minute in the portal to go in the portal. Okay, new ExpressRoute connection, click, 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 set the settings, create, and you're done. It's less than a minute's work to knock up that bill. And by default, anyone with access to your Azure subscription can do this. If they are an owner on your subscription, they can do this. If they're a contributor, they can do this. So you really do need to think about your governance around your subscriptions and how you protect your subscriptions against unauthorized usage. This is where services like Azure Policy come into play. Very important for how you control what people can do. With Azure Policy, you can stop things like this happening unless you intended them to happen. So do bear that in mind. We have whole classes on Azure governance as part of our offerings. We can talk more about that. I've got a slide that mentions that at the end of the class. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that later. But just do bear in mind that a key part of your cost management is managing your risk of unauthorized activity. Never mind just optimizing the stuff you intended to do. Unauthorized activity is a risk, and you do need to think about your governance around your subscriptions. Okie dokie. Great. So SQL Database, let's briefly look at this one. This is a pretty complicated pricing model, so I'm only going to skim the surface. So there are basically two models here. There's an older model called the DTU pricing, and this is a database transaction unit, it stands for. And this is a bundle, if you like, of a certain amount of compute and storage kind of packaged together with different tiers. You know, there's a whole range of different tiers for your DTUs, from small, you know, from tens to tens of thousands of DTUs. And it's just a simple model that enables you to just give you simple fixed pricing for your database. The alternative is the vCore model, which is a lot more flexible. This is where you get to choose your storage and compute capacities independently. And you pay then, of course, based on those two dimensions, you know, the number of vCores and the number, you know, the amount of storage that you choose to provision. And this supports the managed instance model, whereas the DTU one only supports single database and elastic pools. Here we support all the options. And in addition, there are some discount schemes, which we're going to talk about later, which are all available on the vCore model, but none of those discounts are available on the DTU model. So if you're planning to use the discount schemes, that's something to bear in mind. We'll talk about the discount shortly. It's easy when you provision a Azure application to think about those obvious services, like the ones we've just been talking about. What am I paying for my networking? What am I paying for my storage? What about my VMs, my disks, and so on? That's straightforward. As you go through the Azure pricing calculator, which we'll look at in a little while, you know, you'll think of those things. But to get a true estimate of your costs requires you to think about your application a little bit more broadly. And this is where you need to think about some of the other kind of supporting services that Azure provides, which in practice you're going to need, especially in production environments. If you're going to be managing your service at a production quality, you're going to need these things, and they're not free. So let's have a look at some of those. Firstly, Security Center. There's a free tier and a standard tier. In many cases, you may want to take advantage of the standard tier because of the enhanced functionality it provides. And in that case, you're going to pay for each instance it's protecting. It depends on the different types of service that it's protecting. There is also a service called Azure Monitor, which can give you some free metrics about how your services are running. But once you want to go into some more detail on Azure Monitor, which you will do in production environments, once you start using Azure Log Analytics to give you you know, detailed log queries on the output of your applications and security logs, activity logs, and so on, you know, once you start getting into log analytics, that is a payable service. Once you start configuring alert rules and notifications, all of these are billable. So you're going to have to do a little bit of work to figure out your Azure monitoring costs and choose how you estimate those will be. Log analytics in particular can be expensive if you start capturing a lot of data. So you want to be a little bit selective about how much data you put into log analytics. Don't just tick every single metric on the fastest sampling rate and assume that that's just going to be a-okay, because you'll end up with the analytics costing you more than the service itself. Azure Backup is another likely service where you will want to have backups available for your machines. As we mentioned, for stateless VMs, you may want to do things simply with a VM snapshot, a disk snapshot. But for any more serious backup arrangements, you'll need to use the Azure Backup service. And here, $5 is the minimum for a VM. That's really a very small VM, more likely $10. And then as you go up in larger and larger VMs, you pay multiples of $5, $10, $15, and so on. You know, per instance, plus the size of the data that you're storing. So make sure you factor that in. And if you want to use Azure Site Recovery is available for on-premise and for Azure-based VMs. For Azure-based, you pay $25 per instance for the recovery into Azure. So that's another overhead you might need to think about. You know, that can be again a meaningful chunk on your bill if you have a lot of VMs involved. Okay. Something else to bear in mind are your support agreements. And there's 4 different tiers of support available in Azure: Developer Standard, Professional, Direct, and Premier. And these are suited to different scenarios. So the developer, as it says, is really just for a developer. You can't use this for production environments. It's really focused around a developer scenario. So you're looking at getting support for your developers if you know, Devtest Labs, for example, is broken. You know, they'll help you out with something like that. And it's a slow SLA here, 8 business hours SLA. It's business hours only. It's a basic level of service. but it's reflected in the cost. It's only $29. Of course, there is a free tier of support where you just get online-only support through the forums, and I have to say, you can get fantastic support through those forums. So do bear that in mind. Don't dismiss those forums as a waste of time. They are professionally staffed on the Microsoft forums. So do bear that in mind. There's the standard tier for $100 a month. This does give you 24/7 coverage and the ability to contact by phone, whereas a developer was email only. So this is suitable for basic production workloads, gives you a 1-hour SLA. So this is a big step up from developer. Professional Direct is a big step up again. This is suitable for business critical workloads. It gives you a better depth of engagement with Microsoft, because you do get built into that, you get a certain amount of hours with Microsoft's own architecture and operations people who can give you some guidance on what you're doing. And then with Premier as well, that's a top level. You again get a more tailored experience. You have a dedicated account manager. You get much deeper engagement on architecture, and you get training events. An option even for a 15-minute SLA for some of your tickets. So those are the different tiers. Now these are per billing account. So that means that you pay once. If suppose you're on Professional Direct, you'll pay that $1,000 for the billing account. It doesn't matter how many subscriptions you have in that billing account. You could have 100 subscriptions in there, and they're all covered. So that's great. So there's great value there that this is not per subscription. This is at the billing account level. So they can cover all your subscriptions, and all subscriptions within a billing account must be at the same level. You can't kind of mix and match, and that doesn't make sense once you realize it's at the billing account level. So all your subscriptions are covered at that amount you pay for. But if you do have multiple billing accounts, then you do have to pay more than once. This is support agreements are per billing account, as it says. Super. Okay, we've understood a bit about the billing model. Let's look at some cost optimizations. How can you save some money? So let's have a look at some of these. Switch things off when you're not using them. A lot of these things you pay for the time, right? You pay per second, you pay per hour. So let's turn them off when we're not using them. So there's various ways you can do this with VMs, for example. From the VM Blade, you can set an auto shutdown time for the VMs, but that's got its limitations because it doesn't. Suppose you're trying to manage across 100 VMs. That's not so easy now. And suppose you want them to start up again, or suppose you want to shut them down at different times on the weekend. And if you want a more complex arrangement, then you can use this solution called Stop Vms during off hours. You get it from the marketplace, and it uses Azure Automation which has some scripts that then can trigger shutdown according to triggers that you set up. So you can have different shutdowns at weekends, and you can use those scripts as a starting point for your own customizations. You could shut things down based on tags, for example. All manner of options there. Also, for dev test scenarios, I do recommend looking at Devtest Labs. It costs you nothing more than the VMs, but it gives you some amazing workflows around how many VMs you're allowing in a lab, what hours they can run for, how many can be used by different members in your team, and so on. So fantastic workflows in Devtest Labs around using VMs in dev test scenarios. So very much worth a look. Another option is, of course, make sure you're running the right size of VM. You can resize your VMs very easily in Azure. It does require a reboot for the VM to change size, but you can switch very easily between VM sizes. Not just virtual machines, of course, though. Web apps, databases, these again can all be resized. So do think about that. With Azure, it's not like traditional IT. There's no need to over provision based on what demand you might have in the future. You can run things pretty warm, and hey, if they're running really hot, then just resize it, make it bigger. It's a few clicks to do it. So that's definitely something to bear in mind. Don't run things that are bigger than you need. The other option is, of course, auto scaling. This is where rather than scaling up and down the size, you're scaling in and out, as they call it, where you're adding more instances and taking instances away. So for example, your web tier, it might run on 2 VMs most of the time, but it may scale up to 6 or 10 VMs, at peak times. And this can happen automatically. You can define the metrics and thresholds that will trigger the auto scale. You can say, okay, yeah, when the CPU is over 70%, I want you to add an instance, and if it goes below 30%, then take an instance away. So you can set all of this up so it automatically responds to the peaks and troughs in your demand curve. And there's a bunch of services listed on the slide that support this. So that's very powerful. We mentioned already the Devtest Labs, which is a great tool for managing your VM costs. In addition, be aware of the Devtest benefits on a Devtest subscription. They have separate pricing. And this is available. It doesn't matter if you're on individuals or enterprises. You know, you have it's available for everybody. It doesn't matter what kind of billing account you're on. But with the Devtest pricing, you get the discounted rates on VMs. You get to, you know, get Windows VMs at, you know, Linux VM rates, bare metal rates, effectively. Discounts on databases and various other services. However, it's not suitable for production applications. You can't use it for production, and these subscriptions, your SLA on these subscriptions is only for Azure DevOps and App Insights, which of course are tools heavily used by developers. So if your developers are blocked, they have their SLA, but your other services are not covered by SLA. So you can't use it for production, but great advantages for dev test scenarios, and those kind of dev subscriptions that your developers and testers just need access for their day-to-day fiddling about. Okay. Hybrid benefit is a key benefit that you have in Azure. This is, remember we talked about the VM costs. You had the bare metal cost, and then you also had the license costs for the software that sits on top. Hybrid benefit helps you on the license cost. It doesn't touch the bare metal cost. It just helps you on the license cost. So for example, for the Windows Server, if you already have Windows Server licenses, then you can reuse those licenses in Azure rather than paying for new ones. And that can bring the cost of your VM down from the Windows Server cost down to the bare metal cost, effectively the Linux cost. So it helps you run Windows servers at the Linux costs. There are some constraints there that you do need to have for those subscriptions. The licenses you have, you need to have software assurance, or you can purchase Windows Server subscriptions to make your Windows Server licenses eligible. And it's eligible against Windows Server Standard and Windows Server Data Center VMs. So that's flexible. If you're in a migration project, obviously you might be migrating an existing workload, and there's some little window in the middle where you have the on-premise application running in parallel with your migrated application. But in general, you know, once you get rid of that on-premise one, you'd like to reuse the license. You don't want to pay extra for the licenses, and that's fine. In a migration scenario, you're allowed to overlap your licenses, so you can use the same license on-prem and in Azure for up to 180 days in order to facilitate the migration. So there's no issues around migration and double use during a migration. That's A-OK. Similarly to the hybrid benefit on the Windows licenses, the Windows Server licenses, you also have hybrid benefit available on the SQL Server licenses, allowing you to run a SQL in Azure as a SQL database service, or SQL running in VMs. It's available in both options. There's a few details as to how your on-premises licenses map to your Azure licenses. You can see in the diagram how a standard edition on-premise license maps to a general purpose in SQL database, and enterprise edition maps to the business critical tier in SQL database. So there's some mappings there to be aware of. Check out the details online, because there are quite a few ins and outs to this service, but it's very substantial discounts you could be looking at here, you know, up to 55%. So this is you know, a big benefit if you can take advantage. Those discounts were all around the software license cost. Remember, we said another component of what you pay for on a VM is the bare metal cost, the base compute cost, as it's called, where you're paying for the compute and the memory. This is where Azure reservations come in. A reservation is where you make a commitment up front to Azure. You say, okay, I'm going to run that VM for a year, or I'm going to run it for 3 years. And as a result of that commitment, you get to obtain that VM at a discount. Now, I've said VM there, but it is not limited to VMs. That's very important to understand. I think it's most commonly used on VMs, but it is actually available across a whole bunch of other services. If you're using app service isolated, you know, the app service environment, it can be we can run against those the stamp that you're paying for in your Azure environment there. Databricks. I would also SQL Database, Data Warehouse, and Cosmos DB. They also have a reserved model. So a whole bunch of different services can offer a reservation discount, and those reservations can be very substantial. So do bear that in mind. If you're classic examples for this are machines that you're going to be running a long time, and you've got high confidence you're not going to be changing anytime soon. So for example, if you're running an infrastructure in VMs and you're running, as part of that, you're running some domain controllers. Those domain controllers are going to sit there. You're not going to be auto scaling them. You're not going to be turning them on and off at night. They are just going to sit there as a background infrastructure. And so they're a great candidate for a reservation. Let's have a little look at how the reservations work, because there's a few ins and outs to this. You specify the subscription and the VM size and so on as part of what you're signing up for. You specify that when you sign up, and when you use the reservation, it matches your VM the billing engine effectively matches your VM against your reservations. Now that could be a subscription scope or resource group scope or even across your billing account, but it looks to say, look, here's a reservation he's bought and here's a VM that he's using. Look, these match up. So I'm not going to charge him for that VM because it matches the reservation. And by match, it doesn't have to be in exactly the same size. You can see some examples there. You bought a DS4 V2. That's got 8 cores of the DS series. And that'll match against any DS VM. It could be against 8 DS1s with 1 core, or 2 DS2s and 1 DS3 that have 2 cores and 4 cores. So it doesn't matter about the exact cores matching, but the series has to match. It has to be a DS and a V2 in this case. So check out, as long as the series matches, you're flexible on the size. You can change your mind. You can switch for other reservations, and you can get a refund, although there are some termination fees and limits around that. You can get lower cost machines with these spot instances or low priority machines. These are ones where you are using effectively unused capacity in Azure. If a full paying customer comes along, then your machine will be evicted, but you can get substantial discounts for doing this. So that's worth bearing in mind for non-critical workloads. You have cost-saving recommendations coming through Azure Advisor. It's one of the categories of recommendations it makes, so always keep an eye on those recommendations because there can be a lot of suggestions there for resizing VMs, for example, if it identifies that a machine is underutilized. So do keep an eye on those recommendations. And this is the most important advice, actually, I can give you in this whole talk. If you want to be serious about your costs, the most important thing you can do is to develop a cost-conscious culture within your organization. This is key because the people making the day-to-day decisions about deployments and design and so on, they're the ones that effectively are driving your costs. And you need to work with your developers and architects and your IT teams to make sure that they are cost aware, make sure that they understand the cost implications and drive accountability, track budgets right down at that level. Historically, traditionally people working on the technical side of the IT haven't had to think about the cost side of things quite so much, but now it's absolutely core to their job. So do be careful of that. Make sure you've got the reporting in place, that you're tracking the accountability, that you're looking for anomalous spending, you're looking for spikes in spending, that everyone is incentivized to identify discounts and so on. So just create a culture where everyone takes responsibility for this, and that requires a lot of transparency in how you report and so on. What I always say is this: if you go to a wedding and if the bar is free at the wedding, then you will find half-empty drinks scattered on every windowsill all the way around the room, because that's what happens when things are free. And the same will happen in Azure. If your people who are using Azure are not having to think about cost, well, then they're not going to think about cost. They're going to spin things up. They're going to leave them running. They're going to do what's convenient because it's free, because they're not accountable for it. Unless you create a cost-conscious culture, it is going to be very wasteful for you. This is an absolutely essential part of what you need to achieve as an organization. Okay, we're going to look at some demos. Let's have a look briefly at the pricing calculator. So let me just open up my browser here. And I'm going into the Azure website. And from here, I can just go to pricing. And you can access from here the various different pricing pages for the various different services. But I'm going to go in here into the pricing calculator and just show you a few tricks here that a lot of people don't know about. So, for example, the pricing calculator starts here with a blank estimate. I don't have anything in my estimate. But let's have a look what we can add. So let's just click, I'm going to add a virtual machine. I'm going to add a database. And if we see here, you can see it's added to my estimate. And down here, you can see, look, this is my virtual machine. It's here. Here's all the details. So the trick with the calculator is fill in every field. The reason the field is here in the calculator is because it affects the price. It's that simple. So if it didn't affect the price, it wouldn't be here. So you've got to pay attention to every single field. Let's have a look here. If I change to UK West versus Korea South, look at how the price changes. $140 here in Korea South, West India, 156. See, the reason it's here is because it affects the price. So do work on that. Make sure that you fill in all of these things. You can see how I can use the Windows or Linux. So Linux is the bare metal price, the base compute price. I can get the same by using the hybrid benefit. I can turn on that hybrid benefit. I can choose what hours the machine is running for. I can choose what kind of disks it has, and so on. So just fill in everything here. Make sure you fill everything in, and everything you'll get decent pricing out of it. Some tricks here. This virtual machine, you can scale this. You can say this is my web VMs rather than just having it say virtual machines. You can say exactly what it is. So you can make your pricing calculator really reflect the architecture that you're trying to price. You can even give the application a name. This could be my smart health app or whatever it is. So give your estimates a name. Name each of the components. Don't just take the generic names. So you can see this database. This could be my health DB or whatever it is. So give them names that make sense according to your architecture and other plans. Fill in all of the details, and you'll see that it's very adaptable. As you go on vCore model, well, these are the settings you need. If you're on the DTU model, you can see that it's very flexible how this works. So yeah, super good. Take full advantage of this. There's a few other tricks and tips. You can save your estimate. If I click save, it's like, well, where did that save to? Where did that go? If I go to the very top here, you can see it's tabs. Saved estimates is here. Now I can look at my estimate here. I can open it up again. I can export it as a spreadsheet and so on. I can, I can switch to a different estimate. I've got this expert talk demo here. If I open this one, it's going to load up that estimate, and if I scroll down now, you can see I've actually got two tabs at this level. There's the one I was just looking at, and now I've got the expert tab. So I can have, maybe I'm working on two different pricing schemes for the same application, and I can switch back and forth between them as I'm doing my optimization and my tweaking and seeing what changes, what impact they have, and so on. So at the bottom of your estimate, you can look at having the support plan added. You can also, if you have a discount scheme, you can take advantage of that by choosing your particular license program here. You can have the Devtest discounts displayed with this toggle. So there's all those different discounts. They can all be kind of factored into your estimate. So it's a very powerful tool. Take good advantage of it. Okay. We just have a few minutes left. I want to just talk to you a little bit about the Azure Cost Management Service, and we'll do a quick demo on this as well. I'm going to fly through the sides because most of it you can just get from the demo instead. So Azure Cost Management, it's a cost management tool in the portal. You'll see it when we use it. It's free to use. You can also import Amazon costs into here to have an integrated view, but you do pay in that case. And we'll see the charts in a moment in the demo. And it is now also supported for CSPs if your CSP agreement is using the Microsoft Customer Agreement. So for a CSP, you didn't used to have this, but now you do. But make sure you're on the Microsoft Customer Agreement for CSP. And for CSPs, you get to control whether your customer can see it or not. You also want to make sure that you tag your resources if you want to be able to do cost allocation within a subscription based on resource tags. That's a useful trick. So a tag is just metadata you tag onto a resource, like a name and a value pair. It makes its way through into your detailed bill. You can see here at the very bottom right, cost center 1234 is an example of a tag called cost center with a value 1234 that these resources have tagged onto them. So this helps you automate how resource costs are cross-charged internally within an enterprise. And you can enforce tags using Azure policy. There's good documentation online. There's various options for how you can do that to make sure your tags are consistently applied across your organization. Let's have a look at the cost management service. If I just go into my Azure subscription, I can access cost management. I've used it recently, so you can see it's here in my recently used list. Otherwise, you just search for it at the top here, cost management, and it will come up. So we just go into the service. The first thing you have to do is choose your billing scope. If you only have one, it will skip this step, but otherwise you'll need to choose your billing scope, your billing account, and here you can then in my case I've got multiple subscriptions, so I'll need to choose my subscription. This view is also available if you just go to the subscriptions blade or go to a resource group blade. You can access this that way as well. So here I've gone into my subscription. This is just the normal subscription blade. I can see here on the left, under cost management, I've got the cost analysis and also the budgets. Under cost analysis, I'll just let this load. I can see here, look, here are my costs, and it's very flexible. So I can choose different date ranges. Let's say, this month or last month or the last quarter or this year, everything you can imagine here. I can also set custom ranges. Let's say the last 30 days. I can look at accumulated costs and cost by resource and daily costs. There's various canned reports available here. Some of them are tabular, some of them are charts. There's a whole range of different options here. I'll stick with the accumulated costs. I can group the data. So I may want to see this subdivided by the type of service that I was accessing, for example. And this will slice up my data and show me that view. You'll see that come through in a moment on the chart. You can choose different chart types, different views. You can have daily views or accumulated views like this. These views at the bottom give me a pivot on the data, drilling down into a particular dimension, and I can click on these to then filter the charts and to filter the whole view effectively. If I wanted to say that, okay, this was virtual machine costs, was that big chunk there, 53 euros. If I click on it, it will just pivot the whole view to show me just the virtual machines. And if I was then doing a view per resource group or per region, I could see how the virtual machine costs break down. So you can slice and dice in all manner of ways here. You can export the costs. You can access your invoices. You can access your detailed billing statements. You can do this at the management group level in order to aggregate costs across multiple subscriptions. Very powerful. You can create custom charts. Maybe you've tailored the view to being just what you want. You can then save those charts either for your own use or save them for your team so that other people can also access those charts. You can see those here. I have some shared views that I've saved previously and some private views that I've saved just for myself. So it's a very powerful service. Let's look briefly at the budgets feature. You can set cost thresholds, called a budget, where you're saying, look, this is how much I like to have a budget for this amount. And when you exceed the budget, you can set up alerts. It doesn't stop your spending, as we mentioned earlier. That only happens on free credits. So it will because Azure doesn't know if this is some business critical thing that you would never want to shut down. But you can, within a budget, you can set multiple thresholds that are alerted. Those alerts can either come by email or they can trigger action groups. So you can have SMS notifications, for example. You have a very powerful system here for setting up your budgets and thresholds and alerts and so on. So that's worth exploring. In general, Azure Cost Management is easy to use. The best way to learn it is just to open it up and start pressing on all the buttons. Just go in and fiddle with it and you'll get the hang of it in no time. It's a very powerful service. It's very good. You can see here I've got a couple of different budget thresholds. You can see my spend here was well below the thresholds. All fine. Just going back to the wrap up here. So as we said, this is provided for you by Opsgility. We are expert Azure training providers and Microsoft Cloud training providers. We're the first company in the world set up dedicated around Azure training. We have expert instructors with deep Azure experience who develop our content and deliver our training. We can deliver training worldwide, all markets, virtual or on-site. Of course, at the moment, everything is virtual deliveries for instructor-led training. We do Microsoft official curriculum classes in addition to a wide range of our own custom classes. We have a huge range of custom classes, advanced classes. In addition to that, we provide online training through Skill Me Up. So if you go to skillmeup.com, you'll find a huge range of online training there, covering all the Azure certifications and much, much more besides. We have, as part of that, you get videos from expert instructors. We have hundreds of hands-on labs, and you get a full sandbox environment there. No subscriptions to worry about. We're basically covering that side of it for you. You just click into the lab and you can just get started. We provide live instructor classes. So it's not just videos. We provide live instructor classes. So last week and this week, for example, we've had the AZ-104 and the AZ-204 classes. We've been running full classes on those two brand new certifications, have been running last week and this week for all of our subscribers. So if you have a subscription, those live instructor classes are free to attend. So you can get live instructor certification classes for a fraction of the cost of a traditional dedicated delivery. So that's a great value, I think. We have the best content. We have our Opsgility experts developing our content, and different plans available for individuals, teams, or enterprises. So there's some contact details at the bottom and URL you can go to sign up for a free trial on Skill Me Up. Just to give an example of some of the classes we have that might be of interest for those of you who've been interested in this particular class on cost optimization, we have a one-day version of this cost optimization, a much deeper dive into cost optimization, including demos and also interactive workshops as an instructor-led offering. And we also have a learning path on Skill Me Up, which is a full Azure governance learning path. We actually have it's also available as a multi-day class for Instructor led, but we have a full learning path there. You can see 7 different classes plus labs covering all aspects of Azure governance, management groups, policy, blueprints. So a super deep dive into each of these topics, and that includes cost management and optimization. So we have a much deeper look at that topic within our Skill Me Up portfolio. So do take advantage of those for your future learning needs. So with that, I think I'm ready to wrap up. It's been a whistle-stop tour through cost optimization and billing and the like in Azure. I hope it's been useful. I hope people have all learned something. I'm happy if people are interested in asking questions in the chat. I'm happy to hang on and answer a few questions for people. But otherwise, do sign up and do feel free to contact us regarding our other services. So with that, we'll go over to the chat. There's one question there. Will the session be available to watch later on demand? We are recording some of these sessions, and we are going to use them for some ongoing marketing at some point. I can't promise exactly when that will be. I think keep an eye on our YouTube channel. I think the chances are this will be, once we've tidied up the recording, we'll put this out onto our YouTube channel. So keep an eye there. For this material, of course, if you are on Skill Me Up, you can sign up for a free trial on Skill Me Up, and the learning path that I mentioned has a much deeper dive into cost management, much less rushed than what we've been covering today, where you can learn a lot more than what I've covered today. So that's another option for this particular topic area. So there's a question there: can Iops be throttled to a specific rate? So when you create a virtual machine, for example, it comes with throttle limits. So for example, for disk Iops, the virtual machine has a limit and the disks have a limit. So you have 2 limits there, and actually you need to make sure that you're choosing your disks and your virtual machines appropriately so that the limits are kind of in line with each other, and you're not paying for something you're not using because one has a high limit and one has a low limit. So they come with limits. And likewise with bandwidth, different VMs have different bandwidth limits. But they vary. You can have a bigger limit by choosing a bigger machine, but you don't have like a separate lever, which is your Iops throttle. So they are throttled based on those parameters, based on the SKU, the tier of the resource that you provisioned. But it's not a separate knob that you can turn to throttle it independently of that. Hopefully that answers the question, Jason. Okay, any other questions? Last call, otherwise we'll wrap up the call. And thank you everybody for attending. Last call for questions. Well, super. Well, thank you everybody. I hope we see you again on another one of our webinars in the future, or maybe on one of our Skill Me Up live courses that we'll be giving to all of our subscribers on Skill Me Up. So I hope to see you again in one of those places. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time today, and keep enjoying Azure, and everybody stay safe in these difficult times as well. That's obviously very important. So stay safe and keep clouding.